The late morning sun was bright, the sky clear, and the small American town was moving through another ordinary day when something unusual caught the attention of several drivers on the main road. Cars began to slow down, one by one, near the edge of a construction site. People inside the vehicles leaned out slightly, confused by the sight of a few workers gathered near a drainage ditch. At first glance, it looked like a normal work delay, maybe a broken pipe, maybe some loose wiring, maybe a piece of equipment had malfunctioned. But something about the way the workers stood there, frozen and staring downward, told a very different story. There was tension in the air, something quiet but heavy, something that made even passing strangers feel uneasy. It wasn't until a painful, weak sound drifted up from the ditch that everyone understood this was no ordinary situation. It wasn't machinery making noise. It wasn't a siren, or a tool, or any human call. It was the sound of an animal crying a desperate, hoarse whine that shook the heart of anyone who heard it. Inside the ditch, half hidden under layers of weeds, broken concrete, and old trash, lay a young German shepherd. Her coat, which must have once been a beautiful mixture of rich black and tan, was now dirty, greasy, and tangled. Mud clung to her fur, oil stains darkened her neck, and her body trembled with fear and exhaustion. But the worst part of all, the part that made even the strongest construction worker flinch, was the heavy tire trapped around her neck. Not a small bicycle tire or a soft ring of rubber, but a thick, heavy car tire, old and hardened by time. It had somehow slipped over her head and gotten stuck around her shoulders and chest. Every time the dog tried to shift her weight, the tire pulled tighter or scraped against the ground, making her wince in pain. She had clearly been trapped for hours, maybe days. Her ribs were showing, her eyes were red and dry, and her voice sounded like it belonged to a creature battling its last breath. Mike, one of the construction workers, was the first to notice something strange in the ditch that morning. He had come over simply to check a blocked pipe, thinking he would clear some debris and get back to work. But when he crouched near the edge, he saw something move, a faint flicker of a tail or maybe a trembling limb. For a second, he thought he was imagining it. But then he saw the eyes. Two big, terrified amber eyes stared back at him from the shadows. Mike dropped his clipboard instantly. His boots slid down the loose dirt as he hurried into the ditch, dust rising behind him. When he reached the dog, he froze in shock. The tire around her neck wasn't just stuck. It was so deeply jammed that he couldn't imagine how she was still breathing. He took a slow step forward, raising his hands carefully, palms facing the dog as if trying to show her he meant no harm. "It's okay, girl. It's okay," he whispered, his voice steady but his heart pounding in his chest. The dog responded with a weak bark, but it came out sounding more like a choke. She tried to scoot backward, but the tire dragged hard against the concrete, forcing her neck into an unnatural angle. She whimpered, her body tensing in pain. Mike felt something sharp twist inside him, anger at the situation, fear for the dog's life, and a powerful sense of helplessness. He looked around quickly, assessing the situation. There was no way he could pull the tire off himself. It was too thick, too heavy, and too tight around her neck. Even if he tried, he risked choking her. She needed professional help, and she needed it fast. He scrambled out of the ditch, his hands shaking as he grabbed his phone. By now, drivers had stopped their cars completely and were stepping out, trying to get a look at what was happening. A small crowd formed near the road, whispers spreading among them. "Is it a dog? Is she alive? How did she get stuck like that?" Mike ignored the voices around him as he dialed the local animal rescue hotline. When the operator answered, he explained everything as calmly as he could, but the urgency in his voice made it clear how bad things were. "Please," he said at the end, his voice dropping almost to a whisper, "if you don't get here soon, she might not make it." While waiting for help to arrive, Mike and two other workers returned to the ditch, trying to offer the dog comfort without touching the tire or frightening her. Mike tore a piece of his own sandwich in half and tossed small bits toward her. She sniffed the food cautiously, then swallowed it with a hunger that revealed she had not eaten in a long time. Her tail made the slightest movement, not a wag, just a twitch of hope. It was enough to make every grown adult standing there feel a sting behind their eyes. The sun climbed higher in the sky, shining harsh light into the ditch and making the dog squint. Sweat rolled down Mike's face as he knelt close to her. The smell of hot rubber mixed with dirt and oil filled the air. Every minute felt like an hour, and every sound, the dog's breathing, the shifting of the tire, the soft murmur of onlookers made the tension grow. The workers and drivers remained gathered around, unable to walk away. Something about the dog's helplessness seemed to pull everyone together. Strangers united in concern for a life that could not save itself. Finally, a distant siren-like alert chirped from the road, a small rescue van turning toward the site. People stepped aside, hope rising among them. Mike closed his eyes briefly, letting out a deep breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Help had arrived. The dog still lay trembling in the ditch, unaware that her impossible fight for survival was about to find a few people brave enough to fight with her. The white animal rescue van pulled up so fast that gravel scattered across the road, but the three people inside stepped out with calm, focused expressions, as if they had trained their whole lives for moments exactly like this. The team leader, Emma, walked with quick, purposeful steps, her ponytail swinging behind her and her rescue vest already unzipped halfway as she assessed the scene. She had been doing this work for over a decade. She had seen animals stuck in fences, tangled in barbed wire, trapped under fallen trees, even abandoned in boxes on the highway. But something about the look on the workers' faces told her this was going to be one of the harder rescues. She approached the ditch slowly, and when she crouched down to look inside, she felt a tightening in her chest. The German Shepherd's condition was far worse than what had been described on the phone. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes were glassy, and the tire around her neck looked like a prison she had been fighting for far too long. Emma reached out a gentle hand and whispered, "Hey girl, we're here now. You held on this long. Let us do the rest." Behind her, Luis and Riley carried equipment toward the ditch. Luis was tall, broad-shouldered, and known among the team for his unusually gentle handling of scared animals. He had a way of speaking softly that calmed even the most panicked creatures. Riley, on the other hand, was the newest member of the team, a young woman still learning the ropes, eager to help but visibly nervous as she took in the sight of the dog gasping for air under the weight of the tire. She paused at the top of the slope, clutching the medical bag with both hands as if she was afraid the wine might blow it away. She had studied rescue manuals, watched training videos, and attended class after class, but none of it had prepared her for the real-life sight of an animal hanging between life and death. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to let it stop her. She steadied her breathing and began unpacking tools as instructed. Emma slid carefully down the slope, making sure not to knock loose any rocks or send debris tumbling toward the frightened dog. Her boots sank into the soft mud at the bottom, and she crouched beside the German Shepherd, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. The dog lifted her eyes weakly, recognizing the difference between someone trying to help and someone trying to harm. Emma reached for the muzzle, not because she feared the dog would bite, but because the poor creature might react out of pain or panic during the rescue. She moved slowly, letting the dog sniff her hand, then gently slipped the muzzle on. The shepherd didn't resist. She was too drained even to flinch. By now, a small crowd had formed around the ditch. People stood shoulder to shoulder along the road, their faces lined with concern. Many had their phones out, but not in the usual careless way people tended to record things. These people held their phones with shaking hands, their brows furrowed, their eyes watery. Several of them had children who clung to their parents' legs, asking quietly if the dog was going to die. One woman whispered a prayer under her breath, her hands clasped tightly together. The entire scene felt strangely unified, like everyone present had silently agreed that nothing else in the world mattered until that dog was safe. Luis joined Emma inside the ditch, bracing himself behind the dog to support the heavy tire. When he placed his hands on it, he realized just how much weight she had been carrying. The rubber was thick and stiff, the kind used for older car models, and it pressed tightly against her skin. The angle of her body was awkward, forced by the tire's position, and Luis could feel how swollen the area beneath it had become. "This didn't happen overnight," he murmured, shaking his head. "She's been fighting this for a long time." Riley knelt a few steps above the ditch, holding the oxygen tank and the first aid kit. Her hands trembled, but she took slow breaths to steady herself. She watched Emma examine the tire, her voice calm even though the situation was alarming. "If we try to pull it off," Emma explained, "we'll choke her. The tire is acting like a collar pulled too tight." Her airway could close in seconds. Riley felt a cold chill run through her. She imagined the dog's breath stopping, her chest going still, the tire sinking deeper into her skin. She swallowed hard and nodded, waiting for instructions. Emma and Luis quickly formed a plan. They needed to stabilize the tire so it wouldn't shift and cut off more air. Then, they would cut small sections of the rubber little by little, watching the dog's breathing with every movement. Luis held the tire from behind, using his strength to keep it from tightening further. Emma grabbed bolt cutters and positioned them carefully near the top edge of the tire. Every muscle in her body went still as she prepared to make the first cut. The moment the bolt cutters clamped down, a dull cracking noise echoed through the ditch. The dog flinched but didn't struggle. Emma paused, letting her adjust, whispering soft encouragement. She resumed cutting slowly, her muscles aching from the tension. Sweat dripped down her forehead even though the weather was mild. She wasn't scared of hard work, she was scared of making a mistake that could cost the dog her life. The pressure on the shepherd's neck made everything dangerously delicate. One wrong move could shift the weight inward and crush her airway completely. As the first deep groove formed in the tire, Riley shifted closer, oxygen mask ready in her hands. She could see every detail of the shepherd's pain, the way her chest rose unevenly, how her paws trembled even when she lay still, how her ears twitched whenever someone moved too quickly. But beneath all that suffering, there was something else, a stubborn spark in her eyes, a silent plea that said she still wanted to live. The second cut began, but the rubber was so thick and old that it resisted even the strongest pressure of the bolt cutters. Emma gritted her teeth, switching tools. She pulled out a small hand-held saw, the kind only used in complicated rescues. Luis adjusted his hold, bracing himself. Riley steadied her grip on the oxygen tank valve, prepared to respond in an instant if the dog's breathing faltered. As the buzzing of the saw filled the ditch, the shepherd's eyes widened in fear. She tensed, but Emma placed her hand gently on the dog's shoulder, guiding her back into calmness. Slowly, carefully, the cuts deepened. The smell of burnt rubber thickened the air, making even the spectators on the road recoil slightly. But no one moved away. They watched with held breath, praying silently. Then, as the blade dug deeper, the tire shifted suddenly, not outward, but inward, pressing dangerously close to the dog's throat. Riley gasped, her voice rising sharply through the heavy silence. "Stop." Her airway, it's closing. In that terrifying moment, everything seemed to freeze. The world held its breath again, waiting to see if this brave team could save a life that had almost slipped away. The sudden shift of the tire felt like the ground itself had moved beneath them. Emma froze, her breath catching as she saw the heavy rubber tilt inward toward the German shepherd's already strained throat. For a split second, she saw the dog's chest hesitate mid-breath, her lungs fighting for air against the tightening pressure. That moment stretched painfully through the ditch, as if the world had halted to witness a single terrifying mistake. Then Emma's instincts surged, sharp and commanding, breaking through her shock. She raised both hands slightly, signaling to Luis to stop holding the tire the way he was and repositioned before it collapsed further inward. Luis, still bracing the tire with all his strength, adjusted his footing, his boots sinking deeper into the mud, his muscles straining under the weight. The dog let out a small, choked cry, her eyes rolling slightly as panic flickered through her exhausted body. Riley, perched halfway up the ditch, with her oxygen mask trembling in her hands, felt a jolt run through her entire body. She had never been so close to watching a life slip through her fingers. For the first time since joining the rescue team, she felt the true weight of responsibility settle fully on her shoulders. Emma acted quickly, her voice low but firm, guiding both her team and the terrified dog through the crisis. She slid her hands under the edge of the tire, lifting just enough to relieve the pressure without letting it snap back. The shepherd trembled violently, but Emma kept speaking in a soothing tone, whispering promises she desperately hoped she could keep, that the dog was safe, that they were helping her, that she only needed to hold on a little bit longer. The workers standing above the ditch leaned forward with wide eyes, hands over their mouths, as if afraid the slightest sound would shatter the fragile balance below. Even the air felt tense, thick with fear and worrying, as clouds passed overhead and shadows shifted across the ditch walls. Recognizing how close they had come to disaster lit a fire in Emma. She knew they could not continue cutting haphazardly or slowly, not if the dog's breathing was this unstable. She looked at Riley, who was frozen but alert, her eyes locked on the dog's quivering sides. Riley swallowed hard, pushing her fear down, and steadied the oxygen tank. "Her breathing is getting worse," Riley said, her voice shaky but determined. "If the tire slips again, she might not have enough strength to recover." Her words struck Emma like a warning bell. Emma nodded once, her jaw tightening with resolve, because she knew what had to be done. They needed a more controlled approach, something that would keep the tire from shifting inward again. Emma motioned for Luis to bring over the wooden block from their kit. Luis grabbed it, his hands slick with sweat, and positioned it under one side of the tire to hold it outward. The block wedged against the rubber just enough to prevent the inward collapse that had nearly suffocated the shepherd. It gave Emma a safer angle to continue cutting. Riley inched downward slightly, oxygen ready, her heart beating against her ribs like a drum. Every breath the dog took seemed uncertain, shallow, and uneven. The strain had taken its toll. Her whole body trembled with weakness, her paws twitching lightly as if she was fighting invisible restraints in her dreams. But she was awake, painfully aware, her eyes cloudy, and still searching for something: comfort, air, survival. Emma raised the handheld saw again, and as she did, the dog's ears flicked weakly. The blade whirred back to life, its sharp buzzing echoing through the ditch. But this time Emma's movements were glacially precise. She didn't rush. She didn't blink. She guided the saw into the thick rubber with the steady focus of someone who understood that a single wrong move could end this rescue in tragedy. The smell of burnt rubber grew stronger, mixing with the dirt, sweat, and fear that hung in the air. Luis continued bracing the tire from behind while also whispering softly in the dog's ear, words of comfort that only an animal lover could produce so naturally. His deep voice slowed the shepherd's trembling just a little, helping her anchor herself in the chaos. Minutes stretched painfully. Emma cut deeper, stopping every few seconds to check the dog's breathing. Riley watched closely, her eyes darting between the dog's chest and Emma's hands. The shepherd's breathing stuttered twice too shallow for comfort, but when Riley moved in with the oxygen mask, Emma signaled her to wait a moment. If they frightened the dog with sudden movements now, she could panic and worsen her own condition. So Riley waited, her arms ready to move, her mind praying silently. Above them, the crowd shifted uneasily, their whispers barely audible but filled with anxiety. No one knew how long this would take or if the dog could endure it. Finally, one side of the tire split deeper than before, so deep that Emma felt the rubber loosen under her grip. She paused, sweat rolling down her temple, and whispered, "Luis, I think we're close." Her voice trembled not with fear, but with a bittersweet mix of hope and exhaustion. Luis tightened his hold, adjusted his stance, and nodded. Emma gave the saw another careful push, and with a soft, gritty tear, the rubber on the opposite side cracked open slightly. It wasn't much, but it was the first real sign that the tire might finally give up its hold. But then the tire sagged again, not inward this time, but downward, dragging slightly against the dog's chest. The shepherd whimpered, her legs twitching as if she wanted to move but couldn't. Emma's heart clenched, guilt mixing with determination. She knew this tire had become a prison, one that had nearly broken the dog's spirit, and she refused to let it continue even 1 minute longer. She looked at her team, her voice stronger, steadier, filled with urgency and purpose. "We're doing this now," she said. "Together. No breaks. No hesitation. We finish this cut before she fades. Louise braced harder. Riley inched closer. Emma gripped the saw like it was the last lifeline the dog had. And then they cut again, slow, controlled, relentless, while the German Shepherd clung to life with every fragile breath she could muster. The final cut felt like slicing through the last thread of a nightmare. As Emma pushed the saw deeper into the rubber, she felt the tire finally loosen beneath her hands. It wasn't a dramatic break, not a loud snap or a sudden explosion of movement, just a soft, gritty tearing sound that signaled the rubber had finally given way. But that small sound brought such a wave of relief that Emma nearly dropped the saw from her trembling hands. She looked at Louise, who was still bracing the tire with all his strength, mud streaked on his clothes, sweat running down his neck, but determination still burning in his eyes. He adjusted his grip carefully, shifting the weight just enough to allow the final separation. "On your count," he said quietly. Emma nodded, exhaled deeply, and prepared for the most delicate moment of the entire rescue. Riley held her breath, frozen halfway down the slope with the oxygen mask trembling in her hands. The dog's breathing had become so shallow that Riley barely saw her chest rise at all. Every second felt like a fragile thread stretching thinner and thinner, threatening to snap at the slightest wrong movement. Emma knew that once they widened the cut, the tire could shift unpredictably. One wrong tilt, one sudden collapse inward, could close the dog's airway entirely. She steadied her voice and said, "Okay. On 3. Outward motion only. No pulling toward her spine or throat." Louise nodded. Riley steadied herself. The dog lay almost motionless, her eyes cloudy with exhaustion, but still open, still fighting. Emma whispered, 1, 2, 3. Louise lifted the split section of the tire outward while Emma guided the front edge up and away from the dog's neck. For a terrifying moment, the rubber resisted, clinging to the swollen skin beneath it like it did not want to let go. The shepherd tensed and let out a thin cry, her legs twitching weakly. But then, with one final stretch of the torn rubber, the tire opened enough for Emma to angle it forward. She slid the heavy piece down and away, Louise lifting the dog's front legs gently through the gap. As soon as the last of her paws cleared the rim, the tire rolled to the side and fell into the mud with a thud that echoed like victory through the ditch. The shepherd collapsed instantly, her body limp, her breathing ragged but no longer strangled. It was as if the moment the weight left her neck, her body finally allowed itself to surrender to exhaustion. Riley rushed down the slope so fast she nearly slipped, but she caught herself and pressed the oxygen mask gently over the dog's muzzle. The soft hiss of oxygen filled the air, pumping fresh air into lungs that had been struggling far too long. The dog's chest rose shakily, then again, each breath a little smoother than the last. Her eyes blinked slowly, focusing on Emma's face with a mixture of confusion and fragile trust. For several minutes, the three rescuers worked silently, almost reverently, checking her pulse, assessing her wounds, and monitoring her breathing. The crowd above let out a wave of applause, not loud or chaotic, but soft, emotional, full of admiration. Some people wiped tears from their cheeks. Others held their hands over their mouths, overwhelmed by relief. A few parents hugged their children tighter, thankful their kids had witnessed something kind, something brave, something that showed the world still held people who cared deeply about life. Louise lifted the dog's front leg to examine the soreness, but something unusual caught his eye. He motioned for Emma to come closer. Emma leaned in, adjusting the fur gently with her gloved hands. Beneath the matted dirt and dried blood, she saw a strange patch of missing fur, right above the shoulder. At first, she thought it was just chafing from the tire, but the shape was too straight, too clean. As she brushed away a bit more grime, a faint, pale scar revealed itself, thin, long, and horizontal, like a mark left by a too tight collar or a wire. The dog twitched, but didn't pull away. Exhausted beyond protest, Emma felt a heaviness fill her chest. This wasn't the mark of a wild stray or a dog born on the streets. This was a dog who had once belonged to someone who either lost her or abandoned her. That possibility felt like a punch to the stomach. She looked toward Louise, and their eyes met with the same painful realization. She wasn't born alone out here, Emma murmured. Someone had her once. Maybe someone loved her. Luis exhaled through his nose, shaking his head in disbelief. Or, maybe someone hurt her, he said softly. A scar like that doesn't happen without pressure? Tight pressure. Riley, still kneeling beside the dog and monitoring her oxygen, looked up with worry. Do you think someone put the tire on her? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. The idea alone was horrifying. But Emma shook her head slowly. It's possible. But it's also possible she got stuck running through something or trying to escape somewhere. We won't know yet. She stroked the dog gently behind the ear, leaning close so the shepherd could hear her voice. Whatever happened before, you're safe now. We'll figure it out. As the dog regained a little strength, the rescuers carefully lifted her onto a stretcher. Every movement was deliberate, slow, mindful of her injuries. The shepherd didn't resist. She simply let herself be carried, too weak to stand on her own. Emma held one side of the stretcher, Luis the other, and Riley steadied the back. The crowd watched silently, giving space, some stepping back respectfully as the team climbed out of the ditch. One young boy tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Will she live?" The mother smiled softly and whispered back, "They're doing everything they can. That's what heroes do." When the rescue van doors closed, the dog let out a soft sound, not quite a cry, not quite a sigh. It was the sound of a creature who had been fighting alone for far too long. A creature who did not understand what was happening, but who felt for the first time in what may have been months the presence of helping hands instead of crushing rubber or cold earth. Emma placed a light hand on the dog's side, her voice warm and steady. "Whatever your story was before today, it changes now." As the van pulled away, the old tire lay abandoned in the ditch, a silent symbol of suffering and survival. But the dog inside the van carried something stronger than pain. She carried a fragile hope that life, once lost, might just find its way back again. The Animal Rescue Center sat on the far edge of town, surrounded by tall trees and wide open fields that made the place feel peaceful, almost like a sanctuary hidden from the rest of the world. When the rescue van pulled into the gravel driveway, the German shepherd lay weak but breathing more steadily on her stretcher, her fur still dirty, her wounds exposed and raw. Emma climbed out first and opened the back doors gently, as if even the soft click of metal might disturb the fragile creature inside. Luis and Riley helped lift the stretcher out, their movements slow and synchronized, keeping the dog level so the pain in her shoulders wouldn't spike. The moment the scent of clean air drifted into the van, the shepherd's nose twitched faintly. Her eyes blinked in the bright light, unsure, confused, but not frightened, not the way she had trembled earlier. It was as if, somewhere deep inside her, she sensed that whatever this place was, it was safer than anywhere she had been in a long time. Inside the building, Dr. Harper, an older veterinarian with soft hands and a calm voice, was already preparing the exam table. He'd seen all kinds of emergencies in his career, from broken bones to animals hit by cars to puppies dumped in cardboard boxes. But when he saw the shepherd lifted in on the stretcher, his brows knitted with sadness. He helped position her on the padded table and immediately began examining her with practiced precision. The first thing he did was sanitize the wounds around her neck and shoulders. As he slowly shaved away patches of matted fur, more of the damage was revealed. Deep grooves pressed into her skin where the tire had dug in, layers of dirt and dried blood hidden beneath the fur, and swelling that indicated she had been trapped for far longer than anyone wanted to imagine. Riley stood beside the table, watching in silent heartbreak as each painful detail emerged. She kept whispering soft encouragements, though she wasn't sure if the shepherd could hear her. It didn't matter, she whispered anyway. Dr. Harper flushed the wounds gently with saline, wiping away grime that had built up from days or possibly weeks of suffering. The dog winced once or twice, but mostly she lay still, her breathing steady but shallow. He inspected her body for other injuries, running his hands slowly along her sides, checking her paws for cracks or cuts, and examining her teeth for signs of age or neglect. "She's dehydrated," he finally said, inserting an for needle into her leg with careful precision. Malnourished. And these wounds. They've been irritated for a long time. His voice carried a mix of sympathy and frustration, the kind that came from seeing too many animals endure pain they never deserved. He glanced up at Emma and added, "But you got the tire off just in time. A little longer, and she might not have survived the pressure around her airway." Riley felt a knot tighten in her throat, and she had to look away for a moment. Hearing how close the dog came to death made the whole rescue feel heavier, more real. Luis placed a hand gently on her shoulder, grounding her. "We did good today," he murmured quietly. "She made it because we got there when she needed us." Riley nodded, wiping the corner of her eye before the tear could fall. She didn't want to cry, not in front of the dog, not in front of her team, but the emotions pressed against her like a rising tide. Once the dog was cleaned and bandaged, Emma brought over the microchip scanner. Everyone fell silent as she passed the device slowly over the shepherd's neck and shoulders. 1 pass, 2 passes, 3. The machine gave no sound, no light, no signal. After several more attempts, Emma pulled the scanner away and exhaled softly. "No chip," she said, disappointment threading through her voice. She had been hoping they would find an owner, someone who had been searching, someone who never stopped hoping she'd come home. But the empty reading meant there was no easy answer. It didn't necessarily mean she had no owner. Some people simply never chip their pets, but it opened the painful possibility that the dog had been abandoned or neglected long before getting trapped in the tire. Riley, who had been standing close to the shepherd's head, reached out and stroked her gently behind the ear. "We need a name for her," she said softly. "We can't keep calling her the shepherd. She deserves something better." Luis looked at the broken pieces of rubber they had brought inside as evidence of what she survived. The tire lay in a heap on the floor, dark and battered, but strangely symbolic, like a reminder of how much she had endured. "Hope," Riley said suddenly, her voice gaining a warm firmness. Because no matter how long she was trapped or how scared she was, she never gave up. She hoped someone would find her. Emma smiled gently, then glanced at the dog, who lifted her eyes weakly at the sound of their voices. "Hope," Emma repeated. Yes, that fits her. She fought through everything because somewhere deep inside, she still hoped for help. Over the next days, Hope began her slow recovery. She remained in the medical ward at first, sleeping most of the time, waking only to drink water or allow the staff to clean her wounds. Her fur softened as baths washed away layers of dirt and oil, and under the right light, her coat's natural tan and black colors began to shine through again. She gained strength gradually, first holding her head up longer, then shifting her weight, then attempting short stands with the help of Luis or Riley. She still flinched when someone moved too quickly or when she heard a loud noise, but she never growled, never snapped. Her eyes softened each time Emma or Riley entered the room, and her tail, once limp and unmoving, began to make tiny thumps against her blanket whenever familiar faces approached. One afternoon, after Emma posted a short update on the rescue center's bulletin board, an older man walked through the front doors holding a wrinkled flyer. His boots were worn, his coat faded, and his face carried a grief that had clearly aged him faster than time alone could have. He paused in front of the bulletin board, his gaze landing on a photograph taken on the day Hope was rescued, the image of a muddy, terrified shepherd lying beside the split tire. His hands trembled as he touched the edge of the picture. "Excuse me," he said to the receptionist, his voice cracking. Is this the dog you found in the ditch?" The receptionist nodded gently. "Yes, she's recovering in the back." The man swallowed hard, tears filling his eyes. 3 months ago, I lost my German shepherd near the highway. I've been searching everywhere since. Her name was Daisy. What neither he nor Hope knew yet was that their two separate stories, one of painful survival, the other of unwavering searching, were about to collide in a moment that would change them both forever. When Emma guided Frank through the quiet hallways of the rescue center, the man walked with small, hesitant steps, as if afraid that one wrong move would cause the moment to disappear. His hands shook slightly at his sides, and every few seconds he wiped his palms against his faded jacket, as though trying to steady nerves he could no longer hide. The deeper he walked into the building, the more his heart raced. Fear, hope, guilt, and longing tangled so tightly inside him that he could hardly breathe. He had prepared himself for disappointment countless times before during his months of searching, but something about the way Emma spoke, the way she looked at him with gentle understanding, made his chest tighten with a fragile, aching hope. She led him toward the recovery ward where Hope once Daisy had spent her last days healing. The soft overhead lights cast warm glows across the hallway, and the faint scent of disinfectant mixed with the quieter smell of dog fur, clean bedding, and life returning where death had nearly settled. When they reached Hope's kennel, the world around Frank seemed to slow to a stop. Hope was lying on the padded blanket, her head resting on her paws, her body curled gently as she recovered from her morning treatment. Her fur was still patchy from the shaved areas, still healing from the wounds, but she looked more alive than she had days ago. Her tail, once stiff and lifeless, now rested loosely behind her. Her chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. Frank froze at the gate, gripping the metal bars with hands that trembled uncontrollably. His throat tightened, and his vision blurred with sudden tears as he whispered a single trembling word. Daisy. Hope's ears twitched faintly at the sound, then her head lifted slowly. Her eyes, still soft and tired, settled on the man standing just outside her kennel. For a long moment, her gaze was confused, uncertain, cautious, like she was trying to understand whether the face she was seeing was real or another fading memory. Then something clicked, something deep inside her that recognized the familiar voice, the warm scent, the rhythm of breath she had once fallen asleep to at night. Her tail gave one slow, hesitant wag, then another, and then, with a sudden burst of emotion, Hope pushed herself unsteadily onto her feet. Frank dropped to his knees instantly, tears streaming freely down his weathered face as he pressed his hand against the bars. "Oh, girl. Oh, Daisy. Is it really you?" His voice broke completely, trembling with every word. Hope took a shaky step forward, her legs still weak from recovery, but she didn't stop. She moved closer until her nose pressed softly against the metal. A tiny whine escaped her throat, a sound filled with recognition, longing, and relief so pure it stunned everyone in the room. When Emma opened the kennel door, Hope stepped out slowly at first, then with growing strength as she reached Frank, she pushed her head into his chest with a desperate, emotional force, burying her muzzle into the familiar fabric of his jacket. Frank wrapped his arms around her, holding her as if the world might rip her away again at any second. He let out a sob that he didn't try to hide, his whole body shaking as months of grief poured out in raw, overwhelming waves. Emma stepped back with Riley and Luis, giving them space while quietly wiping at her eyes. Even Dr. Harper paused from across the ward, watching the reunion with a gentle, knowing smile. Moments like these were rare, a reunion that carried the weight of true loss, true searching, true survival. Hope Daisy leaned against Frank with all her weight, her eyes half closed in a mixture of relief and exhaustion, as if she had finally reached the one place where she truly felt safe. Frank stroked her ears, kissed the top of her head, and whispered apologies over and over again. "I'm so sorry, girl. I'm so sorry I couldn't find you sooner. I should have kept looking day and night. I should have." His voice cracked each time he tried to speak, but Hope didn't need explanations. She pressed closer into him, letting her body speak the forgiveness her voice could never form. After several minutes, Emma gently explained the next steps. They would need to check Frank's home to make sure everything was safe for Hope. They needed to complete medical forms, finalize ownership papers, and make sure he understood the aftercare instructions. Frank agreed to everything immediately, nodding through tears, still stroking Hope with shaky hands. "She's coming home," he said in a quiet but determined voice. "Whatever it takes. She's coming home." Hope nuzzled into his chest again, as if she understood every word. A week later, the rescue team drove out to Frank's property, a modest home on the edge of town, surrounded by acres of land and tall grass swaying in the wind. A brand new fence, sturdy and secure, wrapped around the yard. Frank had installed it the very day he learned Hope might come home. Inside the house, a soft dog bed sat near the fireplace. Bowls of fresh water and food waited on a mat, and a new collar engraved with her name and microchip number rested on the table. Hope walked through the yard with a cautious curiosity at first, sniffing the ground, exploring familiar scents she hadn't smelled in months. Her tail wagged gently at the breeze, at the birds in the trees, at every memory she seemed to rediscover. Frank walked behind her, watching her with awe, as if afraid she might fade like a dream. When she finally circled back and sat beside him, resting her head on his knee, he let out a breath he had been holding for months. Emma, Louise, and Riley stood near the fence, smiling quietly. They had rescued many animals over the years, but some stories carved themselves deeper than others. Hope's story was one of pain and endurance, but also of reunion, of loyalty that survived against impossible odds. Riley knelt down and scratched Hope behind the ears one last time. "You're home now. Sweet girl. You fought so hard to get here." Louise gently placed the old tire, now cleaned and split in two, against Frank's barn wall, where he promised to keep it as a reminder of what she survived. Emma placed a hand on Frank's shoulder and said softly, "She held on long enough for someone to find her, and you never stopped searching." As the rescue van drove away under the warm daylight sky, Hope trotted along the fence line, barking once a bright, clear, joyful bark that echoed across the fields. It was a sound that carried strength, memory, and freedom. The tire that once trapped her was now only a broken object hanging in the barn, but her spirit, once crushed under its weight, had risen again. She was not just surviving, she was home, she was loved, and her story, once filled with fear and despair, had finally found its new ending, one of hope, reunion, and a life reclaimed.